This video is about types of evidence for evolution. We'll go through a brief review of which these types are. So the first one is embryology, looking at the embryos of developing organisms. So in the very earliest stages of development, whether it's a fish or a human or a pig or a tortoise, it's going to look pretty similar. And as we go on through the development, so here's a human developing, here's a fish developing, the changes will become more apparent. But in more closely related things, those changes are less obvious. Embryology is not a great piece of evidence because it's really easy to misinterpret, but that's the idea behind it, looking at similarities in the development of embryos. So you might think, why do humans have a tail and why do they start out with gill slits? We don't have those things when we're born, but our close relatives do. Over here, if we look at the fossil record, the idea behind the fossil record is that as you dig deeper down, you see things that are not around today. And you also see that as you go further back, the oldest fossils don't have any bones, for example, or there's nothing that can fly, or nothing that's living on the land. And as you come towards the surface to more recent fossils, more recent soil levels, you're going to see things that look a lot more like today. And a subset of this is the transitional fossils. These are special ones that are kind of halfway between one type of life and another. So this one here is a dinosaur fossil, but it has feathers. And we can see the feathers right in the area around it, which was very exciting when it was found because we know that birds exist, we know that dinosaurs exist, they look very similar in their bones, but when did that transition start to happen? And this was one that gave us a clue of one of the organisms that was one of the first ones to have wings. And over here, this one found in, at the time it was the Northwest Territories, now it's Nunavut, Tiktaalik. Tiktaalik is one of the first fossils we have of something that was living in the water, in the seas and the oceans, but later moved to land. So that has kind of the characteristics of both land-dwelling and water-dwelling creatures. So these transitional fossils we really like because they give us a peek at something that's hard to get to. Fossils are really rare. Most things that die just decompose. They don't fossilize. So we don't get to see many fossils, and the ones that are kind of halfway are really special. This image here is not directly related to what we're talking about, but this is similar to the cosmic calendar, the idea of looking at the Earth from its origins of formation coming around in time like a clock to the present day. And we can see that for the first chunk of time, there was no life in the Hadean. There was no life on Earth. Life started somewhere around 3.8 billion years ago. And somewhere around 3.5 billion years ago, the first photosynthetic organisms came around, oxygenating our atmosphere, but still single-celled, 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 single-celled. Here's where we get the first eukaryotes, around 2 and a bit billion years ago. The first multicellular life wasn't until about 1.5 billion years ago. And even then it was really simple, not very complex multicellular life, until we get to the first animals somewhere around 750 million years ago. This area here, the Cambrian explosion, was a time when we have all sorts of new developments happening. It's great to read about, great to learn about. The first things that happened on land, the first land plants, not until less than 500 million years ago. The first mammals, not until less than 250 million years ago. Here's the period of time where there were dinosaurs, between about 250 million and about 65 million years ago. And this little dot, I'm going to just zoom in on it here. This is not humans, but everything that leads up to humans, the hominids. So on this time scale of life on Earth, we can see that we've been here for just a fraction of a second. And most life was, from here back, single-celled, which doesn't leave good fossils. So it's tough to find, but fossils are good when we do find them. When we're looking at fossils, where we find the fossils is a good clue, because if we find fossils of things that are related, that lived here, and now South America and Africa are not so close together, we might think, why are there two related things that are living across an ocean from each other? But if you think that, the continents have been moving over the past entire span of the Earth's history, then these things start to make sense. Why are there only why is the only place with lots of marsupials Australia? Well, Australia was connected to the rest of the land masses on Earth, but drifted away. And after it drifted away was the first time that mammals came around. So where we find fossils is a pretty good clue to not only relationships between animals, but also the giant time scale we're talking about. And if we look at the fossils and try to think about how old they are, radiometric dating, radio dating, or carbon dating is taking a look at how much of particular isotopes of carbon. So isotopes of carbon, mostly we see carbon with carbon-14. So carbon-14 has its normal number of protons and one extra neutron, sometimes more. But it does split. It does decay. So here's just a quick diagram of decay, radioactive decay, into carbon-12. And we get carbon in this kind of normal form while we're alive in the atmosphere, and we have kind of that amount present while we're alive and right after we die. But every 5,730 years, that concentration of carbon decays by half. So we go from carbon-14 to carbon-12. And if we look at the concentration of carbon molecules in a fossil, it gives us a really good clue of how long ago that thing died. This also works for rocks. There are other types of radiometric dating. There are some circumstances where it does not work well, but overall it works really well. Come back over here. In Bio30, you'll be spending a lot of time learning about genetics. You have DNA with 2 strands, and it might have a copy of a gene for maybe flower. Well, you won't have a gene for flower color. You're not a flower. But you'll have a copy of a gene for petal color in your flowers. And you may have a dominant or a recessive or codominant or lots of various versions there. And looking at the patterns of inheritance. If we take a purple flower and another purple flower and we interbreed them, we would expect to see all purple flowers. But in this case, we might see 25%. So out of the 4 possibilities, 25% of its offspring with white flowers. And noticing those patterns and interpreting those patterns is a good tie into DNA. The last 2 here are really good ones. Homologous structures are structures with the same building blocks, but organized in different ways for different purposes. So a bat wing, a whale fin, a cat leg, a human arm, these all are built out of the same bones in the same order with the same type of connective tissue, same type of nerve tissue, circulatory tissue. These are all built to the same plant. These are close relatives of each other. These are all mammals. But analogous structures, I'm just going to write down here analogous, are things like a bird wing, or this is a dragonfly wing. They serve the same feature, they serve the same purpose. They look like they could be the same, but they're not built out of the same materials, and they are not good evidence that things are closely related. This last one is the absolute best one, molecular biology, looking at sequences of DNA. If you look at the genes that are present, the base pairs that are present in the DNA of organisms, the ones with the most similar sequences of DNA, like here human and chimpanzee, are the most closely related. And as you go further away, so as you find things that are less closely related, less similar in their DNA, those are more distant relatives. DNA is such a big and complex molecule that there really is only one explanation if it looks the same across 2 organisms, which is they must be closely related.